In 295 BC, Ptolemy I founded the Library of Alexandria with one mission: gather all human knowledge in one place. For 700 years, it housed 700,000 unique scrolls. Archimedes developed the first steam engine here, 1,700 years before James Watt. Eratosthenes calculated Earth's circumference with only 50 kilometers error using 2 sticks and mathematics. Hipparchus created the first star catalog with 850 constellations. Herophilus performed the first public human dissections, describing the nervous system 1,500 years before the Renaissance. Alexandrian mathematicians solved equations that Europe would rediscover in the 16th century. What exactly was lost? Sophocles' complete works. We only preserve 7 of his 123 tragedies. Galen's medical treatises on brain surgery. Marinus of Tyre's maps showing trade routes to Asia that Columbus never knew. Between 391 and 642 AD, religious fanatics, earthquakes, and Arab invasions systematically destroyed 700 years of human progress. If you believe destroying knowledge is humanity's greatest crime, subscribe, because libraries are still burning.